This week on The Sit Down. Having travelled the world as a paramedic, Benjamin Gilmour joins us tonight to tell us his stories of what being a paramedic truly entails.
I used to feel pulses on people who didn't have pulse. And I remember the senior paramedic on more than one occasion said, Ben, put your fingers on the wall. Has the wall got a pulse?
So you've dealt with a lot of people potentially trying to jump, and you've had instances as well where you've almost had to try and talk that person down from making that decision. What is that process like? That's mental. You can't be trained for that, surely.
One thing getting to the edge. It's another thing when you're halfway down
doing it.
What you're thinking.
If you think about it, I think it was like 20% of the population, you said at that time, had HIV. And if you're dealing mostly with people with open blood wounds, you get blood on yourself in Australia, you don't think anything of it. You get blood on yourself in South Africa, you're worrying about it until the test results come back. What was that like?
You know, I really enjoyed Venice, where the ambulance workers travelled by boat.
An issue they brought up in that show as well was the fact that obviously paramedics often don't get to know the outcome.
A lot of paramedics don't want to know the outcome.
Benjamin, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on, as I say with all my guests, but it truly is. You are obviously a person who's done a lot in their life, right? Travelled a lot, seen a lot of things, been a paramedic? What am I on about? A paramedic for a lot of years, so it is a pleasure to have you on. Firstly, how are you?
Very well, Sanders. How are you?
Yes, I'm well, thank you. It's late here at night. You're an Australian, as I'm sure they can tell. So we've had to try and sync up the times. But anything for my guests, Benjamin?
Thank you, and thanks for being up at the middle of the night. And I guess, as I was saying earlier, we're both kind of probably sleep deprived, as I've just come off a paramedic shift down here in northern New South Wales, Australia, and I probably only had 3 hours kip in the last 24 hours. So. But, often the best stuff comes out of sleep deprivation.
Exactly. Well, what is that like then? Straight into it then, I guess. Night shift. You're just talking about there working a night shift. What is that like? That can't be an enjoyable thing, or do you not mind it?
Well, it depends on where you are and where you work. So I work night shift at the moment in a remote, not remote area, but I'd say a regional area of Australia. In the Byron Bay kind of area, which a lot of listeners certainly in the UK would know. Rainforest, hinterland, beaches, it's quite idyllic. But I used to work in the big bad city in Sydney, and quite close to the red light district and to Bondi Beach, where it was always very busy. So night shift there, you're out all night, you're rushing from one emergency to another, and you get very, very tired. Certainly when you're more than 20 years into your career, it can knock you around a bit. But nowadays it's not too bad. We got 3 hours down on the lounge last night in between emergencies, and it's a lot easier to handle. But it's still no one's favourite.
Do night shifts present any different issues to ones in the day?
Look, the benefits of night shift, trying to find the silver lining of a night shift would probably be that you own the streets. There's no traffic. You're not stopping to wait for anybody, and it's kind of relaxing. In some ways, it's relaxing because everyone else is kind of tucked away in bed, and you're the only one out and about. And there's a certain certain calm. Even in the city, apart from the party nights, Friday, Saturday nights, which were once on a time party nights, they were always hectic. But there's a certain calm at 3 and 4 in the morning, and the people you really only ever see are people. And I make this point in one of my books. Are often the people who feel they can't come out during the day. Kind of. Some might call, it's unusual people, or people who are shy, or they, have some kind of unusual body shape, or something where they
Right.
feel shy about being in public during the day. So they take their walks at 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and so you're driving your ambulance around, and it's quite unusual. Some of the interesting characters and the humanity that you come across.
You talk about it being almost relaxing at night. And something I noticed, by the way, Benjamin has written several books, but one of which is Paramedico. Actually, by the way, how I found you was because I was in a hostel in Croatia, right?
Oh.
And sharing a room with and a couple of other people, as you do in a hostel. And this Australian guy, and I say, we get talking, and I say to him, hey, listen, I'm trying to get into a couple of books at the moment, but not just books that are like, oh yeah, here's a novel, whatever. Books that are really like, wow, and really make you look at life differently. And he said, read Paramedico. And I was like, okay. And now I didn't get round to it because I'm not a big reader. But then when I started the show up, I started looking for guests, and I thought, Paramedico, I'll give that guy, I'll drop that guy a message, and here we are. So,
well, how interesting. It's funny how things turn out, isn't it? The little links. Yeah.
Exactly. But you say in the book and in the documentary that you've sort of supported with that you do have quite a lot of fun on shifts. You know, being a paramedic isn't all doom and gloom.
No.
Which is, I find, almost like a little bit hard to understand at times, because in the documentary I'm seeing this guy, and he's with his partner, and he's going to a cardiac arrest, and they're high-fiving, they're bantering on the way to cardiac arrest, and I'm like, how does that work? How do you what's that like?
Well, if you're not, it doesn't matter what you're doing, I guess, but if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. That's my opinion. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't moments of seriousness. In fact, what I've observed is that, and experienced, is that the more serious the job you have to do is, the more you need to find those moments of relief where you can bring in the lightness. And obviously, you have to do it in a strategic and appropriate way. It's not always for everyone. It's not always for the public to see and hear everything that you say or joke about. Often it's in the privacy of the front cabin of the ambulance, or behind closed doors, or in the lifts before the doors open to an emergency. So, but I think it's actually the key to our survival and our kind of
mental well-being
when we're in a position that exposes us to a lot of trauma and tragedy. You also find it common among, doctors, nurses, undertakers, police, even in the military. Where you've got this heavy job and responsibility, and that can really mess with you if you don't find a way of kind of getting that dopamine and serotonin and kind of keeping the mood light in between those heavy moments, and it allows you to bear the burden of those moments and to not to be anxious or stressed out in those moments. So it's important to find the fun, and I've come to kind of believe that I think there's a lesson in that for everyone in society who at one point or another in their lives will face tragedies or a relationship breakup or financial stress or whatever it happens to be. And I think if your mind can become part of your resilience and survival mechanism, if it can try and find something, some joy, some light, something unusual, something weird, something funny, some little memory that can put a smile on your face, even in the face of this kind of tragedy, then it just helps. It helps people get through those times. I think there's something in it. No. Well, there's also the other aspect of the fact that we do this job. This is our job, and any job that you do when you've done it long enough, it's I wouldn't say it's necessarily routine, but you're certainly accustomed to it. It's not unusual or an intense moment. So if you're dealing with emergencies and serious crisis on a daily basis, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a day, after a few years, none of those things are a surprise to you. They don't come as so much of a shock to you. Occasionally, you'll see something new or something quite tragic or overwhelming or potentially overwhelming. You know, case in point being car accident I went to last year, just the end of the year before, where a bus went off the road onto its side and into a tree, and we had 24 patients, and it was just my partner and I in the ambulance for about half an hour before backup arrived. So we had 24 patients we had to triage, we had to do a kind of major incident response, and we kind of held the fort with some quite critical patients. I don't find it overwhelming. Overwhelming makes me think that we weren't able to deal with it, and we dealt with it. We fell back to our protocols. We have a game plan for these moments. We're trained to deal with these moments. They don't come up that often in our country. I mean, if we were working in Mexico or somewhere, a massacre is kind of, a weekly event. Here, we don't come across these major incidents that much. But we are trained for it. And it's almost like, okay, right, I'm going to put into action all these things that I've been trained to do, and I've practiced doing in scenarios. And, look, I get a kick out of it, actually. I enjoy the challenge. I enjoy, the threat of being overwhelmed and thinking my way out through those moments. And if you've got a really good partner to rely on, which I did in this particular incident, then it's a job that you're doing, and you can't get caught up on thinking, too much about things that would allow you to be overwhelmed, because you're problem solving, and when you're problem solving, you're kind of out of you're out of that side of your brain where emotions can run off with you, and you're more kind of thinking, you are thinking laterally, but you are problem solving as opposed to getting caught up in emotions.
Yeah, you probably have to have that mindset to be a paramedic, right? Because there are these high intense sort of situations where if one were to be able to get, flown away with their emotions and not treat it like a challenge, like an obstacle, like a puzzle, you probably would struggle in the job. Would you agree with that? And have you seen anyone, maybe a colleague or someone that's new to the job, that has had this sort of latter emotional sort of response to the situation?
Yes. I've had colleagues who everyone gets on with quite well, and can manage, low acuity or, your average emergency with a single patient. But the moment it becomes, multiple patients or a very, very serious, time critical event, they lose their cool. One guy, ended up with the nickname Popcorn, because under pressure, under the heat, when the heat was on, he kind of lost it and popped. And so, it is a challenge to keep your cool sometimes when things suddenly turn, or you arrive and there's someone in dire straits. But it's vital that we do.
You spoke there about almost enjoying that thrill of potentially being overwhelmed, and that reminds me of a quote when in research for the interview. Obviously, I've been looking up a lot of Benjamin Gilmour recently, and I saw you say once that you are, despite your filmmaking, despite your family life, despite all of that other sort of stuff, you are your happiest in an ambulance. And I thought that was a really interesting quote, because in an ambulance, maybe a prison as well, are people where people want to stay far away from those places as possible, right? Because that's not a good thing if you've ended up there. But you almost love being in that situation. How could you explain that sort of thought process slightly?
Well, I mean, I just love the fabric of life. The fascinating, the weird, the wonderful. The unexpected, the surprises that life throws at you. And that's all available in an ambulance, because at any moment you could be sent to, somebody stuck in the bath, or somebody having a cardiac arrest, or somebody's rolled their car down a mountainside, or, someone with a broken toenails, someone cold at night, they need a blanket. I mean, it goes from very serious, hectic, critical medical emergencies to the banal and the ridiculous. which can be quite, which can be so ridiculous sometimes that it can certainly be entertaining on a level, you know. But yeah, I mean, so it's and just that that unpredictable nature. I love that kind of feeling, that kind of tension that anything is possible at any minute.
Would you say you're a little bit of a adrenaline junkie in
No,
that sense?
people level that accusation. I strongly deny. Maybe I'm in denial, but I certainly deny it. Yes, because if it was just about the adrenaline, then I would go skydiving or, you know, skateboarding or you know, snowboarding or something. There's the human element. There's my fascination with human beings under pressure, human beings in crisis. You know, the things that human beings do to themselves and each other, the messes they get themselves into, how they try and get themselves out of those messes, or how they end up often digging themselves deeper in. I mean, it's why we watch those TV shows like, you know, Fargo or whatever. You know, you've got these weird and wonderful humans trying to navigate their way through life and struggling and tripping up over and over. And it's just, I'm just fascinated by the way humans tick, human condition. And the way
Is that what got you into medicine and specifically pre-hospital care?
It is. I think. Well, you know, first and foremost, I think it's about. And most people would go into it because they want to help people, and here's an avenue for helping people, and they're probably attracted to the, you know, to wearing a uniform and being respected and looked up to, and travelling fast by ambulance and yeah, being the kind of glamorous end of the health system. But then, you know, then you kind of, the reality hits you, you know, and you end up, you know, covered in body fluids and, you know, urine and feces and blood and vomit and, you know, and you realise it's not really that glamorous. And then you've got to find, and then, you know, the novelty of driving fast through traffic lights starts to wear off. And then you've got to, I think, find the truth of the real enjoyment in it, which is your interest in humanity. And
have you got any specific examples of those not so glamorous moments?
Oh yeah, if for example, you know, we're sent to an elderly person who, you know, may have a bout of gastroenteritis. And they're lying in their own, you know, feces. Yeah. And you help them out of the bed and you put them in the shower and you're giving them a shower and then you're getting them into their nice pajamas for the trip to hospital or whatever it happens to be. You know, people don't think of paramedics as doing that kind of stuff, but that's the kind of stuff we do. You know, people with urinary tract infections. You know, people with, you know, aches and pains they've had for years, and emergencies that would sometimes turn a lot of people's stomachs, you know, and you know, it's not always, yeah, it's definitely not the, you know, the road crashes all the time, you know, where the TV cameras are there and crowds of people, onlookers, looking at you through the, you know, seeing you as some kind of heroes or whatever, you know. The reality of the job is often less glamorous than that.
Yeah. Did you have you ever had a moment when you thought, like, this is so unglamorous, this is so horrible that I might not want to be a paramedic anymore?
All the time. Yeah.
Really?
There are moments like that. I mean, particularly now, you know, 24 years in. Even last night, you know, I just. Of course, there are moments like that. We're only human, but you know, the positive aspects of it keep making it worthwhile.
Yeah. So for people that don't know, then, and this, I was speaking to my girlfriend again before the interview, and we were saying, "Oh, shall I ask this question, that question?" And I proposed to her, not quite yet. Don't get too excited yet, but I proposed to her the question, right? That what she's, I saw her getting really excited there. Not quite yet, but I proposed to her the question of what is the importance of a pre-hospital service, of an ambulance service. And she said, oh, that's really obvious. But for the people that don't know, how critical is a good pre-hospital care, pre-hospital service?
That's a really great question, because, as you know, having read a bit of Paramedico, probably close to 80% of the world doesn't have access to an emergency ambulance service. They have to find other ways. And I think for a lot of patients in the West that ambulance services attend to, if there wasn't an ambulance available, they also would find another way, maybe 90% of the time. But there are certain emergencies like cardiac arrest or severe hemorrhage or a choking, a foreign object lodged in the throat, or penetrating trauma, gunshots, stab wounds, where there's benefit to having an ambulance service, 5 minutes away. Certainly is, but not only with the critical emergencies. I think there's a whole, there's a number of other emergencies that, were we not available to people, it would be very uncomfortable for them to get to hospital another way. Broken bones, severe fractures, where we come along, we find a way of removing them from the house in a very comfortable, in the most comfortable way we can, with morphine on board, so they don't feel that pain. The alternative, which 80% of the world has to resort to, is to get the relatives to carry them down the stairs, probably without splinting, certainly without any analgesia, and that can make those injuries far worse, quite besides the fact that it's very uncomfortable for the patient. So there. Look, I'm totally sold on. Obviously, I've been a paramedic 24 years. I see the benefit of it. I'm sold on the benefit of it, and I think there's a lot of low acuity medical attention that we're able to provide these days, from antibiotics to suturing, just to keep people out of hospitals. And I think there's, particularly in the age of COVID now, where there's a move to try and deal with medical complaints outside of the hospital system to avoid, spreading any diseases within the hospital or acquiring them. There's certainly a move to try and do things outside of that kind of centralised model where you're sending everything in.
So for people that don't know, then Paramedico, the book through which I know you. As I said, you have written a couple things and shot a couple movies. It's just what Benjamin does. He's a man of many talents, right? But Paramedico is a story that covers your life, in which you travel the world as a paramedic, and finding out loads about the different countries and their pre-hospital services. What are some of the most interesting places that you've gone, and what have you found out about their healthcare systems?
So when I wrote Paramedico, I took a journey for about 10 months to half a dozen countries, on top of another half a dozen that I'd already volunteered or worked in previous years, and either rode along or actually got involved in the emergency care. And in other places was mainly an observer, because I was filming a documentary at the same time that has the same title, Paramedico. And, I really enjoyed Venice, the city of Venice, Italy, where the ambulance workers travelled by boat. And with the siren and the lights flashing and
So slowly as well, though, right?
well, in the canals they have to go slowly because they'll upend, they'll capsize some of the gondolas, so they have to be very careful. On the main canal, the Grand Canal, they pick up quite a bit of speed, and they have they have a permit to go as much faster than any other boat. So it was quite a blast, speeding along the Grand Canal of Venice, wind in the hair, with the siren going on the way to emergencies in this ancient city. That was cool. Mexico I really enjoyed too. And again, it really put me on edge, of course. We were working in a colonia, a kind of ghetto area where there was a high prevalence of shootings and assaults and murders and whatnot. And we talked earlier about how paramedics try and find the lightness to balance out that kind of dark work that they do. And the Mexicans were very good at that. They were very good at parking up in a vacant lot or in a dead end and turning up the cumbia music and dancing next to their ambulances with the lights flashing in between, gunshot emergencies. They knew how to have fun. In Paramedico, the documentary, which is available free on Vimeo, there's a scene of some of their antics and fun and games that they play on their ambulance station. They're quite extreme. They play hard and work hard. And in fact, I kind of observed that wherever there was the most intense trauma that paramedics had to deal with, the paramedics themselves used to be more wild. They were party animals, really.
What was it like being in such a crime-dense environment? I mean, we'll get onto South Africa later, I'm sure, but in South Africa, your time there was, I guess, quite similar in the sense that there were murders and shootings and stabbings going on. Did you ever find yourself in the middle of a shootout or something, or a dangerous situation like that?
Luckily, never there. In Pakistan, I have been, but in Mexico, no. It was usually the aftermath. Certainly, the aftermath can be tense. Someone's just been murdered. Their friends are there. Everyone's in shock. The family arrives. Who knows where the perpetrator is? They could still be in the shadows or in the crowd. There's often, a lot of high emotions, and you're in an area where a lot of people are armed. So, and they're lashing out. They're angry at the authorities for not doing more to protect them. And so, it was very tense. In fact, in Paramedico, there's a moment where there was a shooting at a party, and bodies lying on the ground, and people have put candles there, and crowds gathering around. And I had to stop filming because the crowd was, there were family members and a few other gang members were getting annoyed with the police and taking out some of their aggression on the paramedics and the police, and there was nothing we could do. The gentleman was dead, and so we had to kind of leave the scene very quickly. So it can get like that sometimes.
When you do arrive at the scene of a murder, or even wider than that, your job will naturally include a lot of death. When you turn up at a scene where, unfortunately, the lady or gentleman has lost their life, what is that moment like? You said there was families around. Do you ever try and console the families, or is that not your job? And personally as well, how do you deal with that moment?
For the families, for the loved ones left behind, absolutely there's a bit of, once you break the news, you'd be very clear about the fact that their loved one has died, that there's no misunderstanding or confusion there. I think it's always appropriate to show some sign of sympathy with them, whether it's a hand on the shoulder, whether it's a hug, whether it's just words. Words are difficult because everything kind of sounds a little bit naff in those moments that you say, they're not getting their loved one back. Nothing you say is going to make it better. So I find what works what I found works is more of a just physical presence, and sometimes just a hand on the arm or a hand on the shoulder. Sometimes, depending on who the person is, and whether whether it's appropriate, even a hug. Certainly, it's acknowledgement of their loss, but even sometimes that can sound a bit kind of shallow. It's a really it's. I think just being there and bearing witness is often enough. I mean, not enough in the sense that, but doing any more than that kind of can. I mean, there's nothing that can take that away. It's just a moment that you kind of have this urge as a paramedic to try and fix things. It's in your nature to try and fix things, and it's kind of unfixable, right? Here's a moment that you can't fix, and so you really just got to be there. I think, just be that presence there if they need you for a time.
What's that like for you on a number of levels? So one, your paramedic inside of you is saying, I want to fix this. That's what your job is, and that's how your brain is wired over the so many years, that naturally you want to go and fix this, but you can't. And secondly, as a human being as well, seeing someone who's passed away in whatever circumstance, that can't be nice. What effects does that have on you?
This is a very interesting question, and one that I wrestled with in my last book a lot, The Gap. This finding a position between the positions of trying to save lives and accepting that death is a natural part of being human. You get born, you live, you die, and so it's this tension between acceptance and non-acceptance. So we're not allowed to just accept someone's heart stopping. We actually have to do something about it if we're there in the time frame, under 10 minutes or whatever. If there's been an attempt at resuscitation made, and it's under 10 minutes, and there's a potential, no matter how remote, that this person could be brought back from the clutches of death. We have to give it a go. So we can't accept the fact they've died. We need to try and save them, try and fix it. And yet there's a certain point where we have to step away and go, well, we've done everything we can, and now we have to accept it. And that point is often very hard to know, it's hard to work out where that point is. And it can often be different for everybody. So when I was a younger paramedic, I didn't easily get to that point. And I always wanted to carry on resuscitating. I was a dreamer. I always imagined that people were going to stand up and get better. I used to feel pulses on people who didn't have pulses. I was often
wishing.
Kind of. Well, I think it was just it's your imagination playing games with you, and you you want it to turn out well. So you kind of imagine things into being. So I remember we stopped for a pulse check, which is what we used to do, and I remember quite a few occasions everyone would be like, nah, there's nothing. And I'll be like, oh, I think I've got one. And I remember the senior paramedic on more than one occasion said, Ben, put your fingers on the wall. Has the wall got a pulse? And I put my fingers on the wall. Yeah, it's got one. Well, there you go. You're dreaming. So it took quite a few years for me to realise that most of the time, by far, you're not going to get them back if people go into cardiac arrest, and to accept that fact. But yeah, it is a struggle trying to balance this saving people versus accepting that they're not going to make it, and that death is it happens. It happens all over the world every day. So that's a really good question, and one that I think a lot of medical workers struggle with.
You say there that you're always constantly battling with the idea of death and dealing with that idea, even though you don't know the patient or the person personally. Of course, any person that passes away, especially when your job is to try and save that person, isn't nice. And you don't have to speak on specifics, but personally in your life, I wonder whether are you better at dealing with death? Have you had any family members or anything die where you've actually felt that, oh, I'm kind of equipped for this, or when that has happened, if it has happened, does that still come as an absolute shock to you?
No, I haven't really had that in the family yet, thank goodness. But I certainly know other paramedics who have, and I don't know whether it changes how, or changes too much how you respond to your own family member passing away. Because it's kind of different when you know somebody and they're close to you. You know, there's something that makes it a little bit easier when people are strangers and you don't know them. But outside of that, so thankfully I haven't had to face that. I'd like to think, I'd kind of get through that and be the one that other family members would look to as keeping it together, but there's certainly no guarantees. The idea that paramedics are somehow, these thick-skinned, kind of heroic, made of steel kind of figures, superheroes that don't feel is complete BS. I mean, certainly the paramedics I know are the first to cry when they see a movie that's emotional, or, in the cinema or whatever, I mean, we're emotional people. We hold it together on the job most of the time. Sometimes not. Sometimes you might shed a little tear. That's okay. We're human. Sometimes it's certainly okay for people to see that we're human. I don't have an issue with people seeing I'm human, that I feel I can shed a tear, and something's affecting me. But most of the time, people look to us to kind of hold it together, sort things out, explain the process. And that's so you develop those skills. But I think when it's someone when it's your own family member, it may well be different.
You mentioned your book, The Gap, and that references a variety of things, but it also references your time dealing with and working close to a place called Watson's Bay, which for obviously a lot of people watching this won't know of Watson's Bay, but it's almost a suicide hotspot, if that's the right way to sort of term it. So you've dealt with a lot of people potentially trying to jump and take their own lives, and you've had instances as well where you've almost had to try and talk that person down from making that decision. What is that process like? That's mental. You can't be trained for that, surely.
No, I don't think. Well, you probably can be trained a little in the things that are helpful to say and the things that are unhelpful to say. And there are reflective listening skills you can learn and so on. And there's certainly tips I could give people who are going into an environment where they have to talk people down. But that's been mainly from my own experience. I certainly was never trained. I think it helps if if you're able to build a rapport with other human beings, if you've got a level of innate empathy. If you've got empathy with somebody, that's really helpful. But certainly, these days as paramedics go through a 3-year paramedic degree in Australia, and it's I think it's starting to happen in the UK as well. It has been happening in the UK, but this is the new model, the degree qualified paramedic. And often those university courses, they focus on the trauma, the road accidents, checking for bullet holes and stab wounds and so on. The area I worked in, it was by far majority mental health emergencies. People having severe bouts of depression, suicidality, suicidal ideations, and anxiety, or bipolar episodes where we were roped in because it gets so severe. So I mean, and being the closest response, which we were at that time, I was working at the closest ambulance station to this notorious suicide spot. We were up there all the time talking to people, and you work out soon enough what works, what doesn't. You make a few mistakes. People get, thank goodness I never made an error where that pushed someone over the edge, really, that kind of, but there were things, of course, that I said that I regretted that didn't work, and that had, kind of had the patient edge closer to falling. But so it's very stressful, I must say. In terms of what we do, it would be the most, for me, as a paramedic, it's the most tense moment. Tense period of time, talking to someone on the edge, because at any minute they could just go, right?
Yeah.
And so you're on edge with them, because you realise that this could be the end of your career. Because if you say something or put a foot wrong, or even if they just, regardless of what you do, even if they just go forth and take their own lives, it can and has damaged people psychologically, paramedics, police, counsellors, so much that they've had to leave their jobs, because of PTSD. So there you are, on the edge with somebody. You realise that, if they do go over, that could be the end of your career, because of the psychological impact, the guilt, the blame, whatever it happens to be, if you can't kind of manage it.
What sort of things would you say to someone in that situation?
Well, first it's about building a rapport. We're having a chat. What's going on? Introducing yourself. Often I found that people were building themselves up to going through with the act. It's not easy if you, it's a pretty full-on thing to do, to take your own life. And so they were in this kind of zone. They were zoned out. So they're often, concentrating on trying to psych themselves up for this act. And so, unlike the usual strategy around, effective listening and listening to someone, and sometimes you'd have to be more assertive with a patient, and be almost annoying, in the sense of like, I want to talk to you, what's going on, and sometimes you're doing more of the talking. In other times, you're doing more of the listening. But in moments when somebody's on the edge, often I found myself doing more of the talking, because they weren't talking.
Yeah.
They weren't.
And you feel that out. You feel that out very quickly.
You feel that out. They're like, just go away, leave me alone. I'm just trying to, And you're like, no, I'm not going to leave you alone. I care. You don't care. I do care. I do care. Even if I wasn't wearing this uniform, if I was walking past and saw you here, I would stop and talk to you, because I do care. I care about my fellow human being, and I don't wish. And I really, let's try and find something to hold on to here, to live for, and then try and ask some questions about their lives. This is my, what I found worked was exploring with them to try and dig for that silver lining that they could grab hold of and pull themselves back with, So eventually they kind of, there weren't many times where we kind of lunged for them and grabbed them. The police rescue used to do that, but we, when I was talking to patients, it would often be, trying to find something they could latch onto that they could save their own lives with, pull themselves up and back over.
Provide them with the tools for them to be able to step back themselves, rather than you drag them back.
That's right. I mean, it's a decision they're not making, often not making the decision in their best interest in that moment. But you hope that somehow together you could come to a point of, a point where they can make that decision to come back. And I never, thank goodness, I never had anyone go over that I talked to. People used to take their lives before we got there, but anyone that I managed to get to and speak to, I'm blessed, and I hope they are, that they were saved.
I think it was 2 people that did jump and actually survived the jump. They had some sort of reaction to that decision, didn't they? What was their
quite.
reaction to the
I mean, it
decision?
was quite remarkable, really. It's a cliff at Watson's Bay. And it's 90 metres to the sea, to the rocks, and yes, there were king tides on both those occasions, but it's very, very rare for anyone to survive that kind of fall. And during my tenure at this particular ambulance station, I treated two people who made that fall and survived it and were picked up by a police launch, and multiple injuries they had, because hitting water at that height, from that height, is
Concrete.
almost like concrete, so you're going to have multiple fractures, and of course then you can't swim very well with broken arms and legs, so it's time critical. But they survived, and one of them I caught up with afterwards, and I think the one you're mentioning I caught up with afterwards, we actually bought him the lottery ticket because we couldn't believe, his luck, and certainly even the doctors were calling it a miracle. And he believed it was a miracle too, and ended up converting to Christianity and becoming and studying theology. So it's interesting. There's a lot that I've seen in my job that I can't explain with any rational explanation, and those two cases were examples of that.
I remember seeing as well that you said that he actually regretted the decision. Both of the people that jumped regretted the decision, and that is, I think, you never know who's watching this, right? You never know who's watching this, and so if there is someone out there, I guess,
as I mentioned in the book, after this patient who survived told me, I changed my mind on the way down, I ended up using that story, talking other people down after. For the years after, 2 or 3 years afterwards, and made quite an impression on people, that story. So I just posed the question: what if you did this, and then it was too late, and then you had that thought, I don't want to be doing this, but it's too late to go back, because you don't, one thing getting to the edge, it's another thing when you're halfway down
doing it, what
you're thinking. You might think you want to do it now.
Yeah.
But when you're falling and your death is in your face and pretty much inevitable, what if you changed your mind and you couldn't take it back?
Yeah. Unreal. And I mean, as I said, hopefully, if there is someone out there watching this that you never know that might be having some of those thoughts, hopefully that story sits well with you and sort of resonates with you, and you can understand that it's a very permanent decision, and it might not be one that is the best. It definitely isn't the best for you. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel, but it might be one that you regret as well, right?
And it's look, people are suicidal for all sorts of reasons, but some people live, are tormented by their own minds, and I can really appreciate their depth of despondency about life. But one of the things I mentioned in the book is that someone once said to me, "Why don't they just buy a ticket to some foreign country and change their name and reinvent themselves?" Now you don't need to reinvent yourself in such a radical way, especially during COVID. It might be hard getting a ticket to Barbados, but the idea of if your life's so crappy that you don't want it anymore,
change it.
The idea of just reinventing yourself somehow. Move somewhere else, get a different wardrobe, change your car, just get a different bunch of friends, just change it all up.
Yeah.
Reinvent.
You
I can see some benefit to that.
Yeah, you mentioned then the book, obviously going back to the travelling. Pakistan, when we were discussing in the emails before the interview, you said Pakistan was really interesting. Tell me about Pakistan. You mentioned it as we've been talking now as well, that you almost got caught in some sort of gunfire. What happened then? And
that was a suicide bombing. It was 2009 outside the judicial complex. Yes, I was driving to the hospital, so I was doing a bit of work at the hospital and filming stuff, and we just passed the judicial complex when a suicide bomber detonated in a crowd that was queued up out front in the morning, and had 50 injured, 20 dead. So I kind of got caught up in that with the emergency response, the hospital response, the emergency department, how they managed all those casualties. Yeah, it was crazy. It was chaotic. It was horrible.
Yeah.
But yes, Pakistan at that time in particular. I mean, Pakistan is a very complex, interesting place. I mean, you've got several different ethnicities living there. Who've got tensions that have been coming to the fore lately. You know, you've got the Pashtuns who are, who are essentially Afghans, and you've got Punjabis who are the elite and who are running the government and the military. And so, you've got a lot of these internal conflicts and tensions and terrorist acts, and so
Yeah.
But I was not only a paramedic there, or helping train ambulance workers there, but also shot a film there, 2 films.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about you as a paramedic, but as I said at the beginning, Benjamin is a man of many talents, right? So paramedic is one side of you, filmmaker is the other side of you. You shot, was it Jirga I think that was in Afghanistan, wasn't it?
That was Afghanistan. We wanted to shoot in Pakistan, and then it all fell apart. We had a promise of a production budget, the equivalent of, to the value of $100,000 to shoot this feature film, which goes a long way in Pakistan. This wealthy businessman was going to put up the money, and so on that promise, I flew to Pakistan with an Australian actor and a script ready to shoot. We were casting. We had a production designer that was on a plane coming in from London, and we had a cinematographer from Australia that was due. It was going to be a big deal. And then we got there and the Secret Service wouldn't give us the permits to shoot what we needed to shoot. The film was set in Afghanistan, so we needed to shoot in the border regions bordering Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Where we could kind of match. And we couldn't get permits for them. And so then we were harassed by secret agents and until we left the country. And we were going to come back, we thought about coming back home and abandoning the whole thing because I didn't really have, because the money had gone as well. And so we ended up buying, with a little bit of savings and Screen Australia funding and crowdfunding, we bought a camera and some tickets to Afghanistan, and we went and made the film there instead.
I gather you got caught up in some sort of issues in Afghanistan. There was some sort of there was dangerous moments over there as well, right?
Yeah, I mean it's not hard to get caught up in issues over there. There's a lot of intrigue and danger and militant groups and at that time there was Daesh or Islamic State was starting to get a bit of a foothold in Nangarhar province where we were shooting, so we were worried about that. We'd heard rumours that they had spotters in the bazaar who were looking for Westerners to kidnap. That weighed on our minds, particularly as others had been kidnapped before our arrival. We'd had those videos of hostages being executed and so on. So, it was stressful, particularly for Sam Smith, the actor I was travelling there with, who was not really accustomed to travelling in those kind of places. He hadn't really been anywhere outside Australia. He hadn't been to Asia before. And suddenly, he was travelling in Pakistan, getting harassed by secret agents, then flying to Afghanistan, and the threat of ISIS. And, it was too much for him. It was almost too much for him because, to his credit, he stuck around and he did the film. And the stress that he was under, and it was of his own. I didn't force him to. I didn't force him to do what he wanted to do, but he allowed that stress that he was feeling to be kind of to inform his character. And so on screen, what you see there is real, and I think that's what made the film resonate and so well with audiences, because it felt so authentic, because it was.
You seem to put yourself in a lot of dangerous situations, Benjamin. What I spoke to a Marine. I spoke to a Marine a couple of weeks ago, Brian, good friend of the show now. But he said, I was like, Brian, what's wrong with an office job? What was wrong with an office job? Benjamin, what was wrong with an office job?
Boring. Very boring.
That's never been for you then?
Yeah, look, I feel most alive when I'm in those environments. I think it's something. I think it's just something that gets triggered in you, that you're, genetically, or you're kind of, it's your, we've got these abilities and these skills and these, you test yourself as a human. You test your limits and your abilities to make your way through the world and to. It's like a battle. We're in this society now where, particularly with men, I find is, it's all very soft. It's all very kind of, we don't have that many. I think parenthood is a big challenge, but we're not on the battlefield fighting our enemies and trying to survive in the forest of mountaintops,
Vietnam or whatever,
riding the horses, and it's a different world now for blokes, and I feel that in those environments I'm kind of channeling these kind of what I'm kind of genetically set up hardwired to do, and here's an opportunity. I'm giving myself opportunities to do those things, and it's almost like I'm fulfilling my destiny, or what I'm meant to be. In those moments, and maybe that's why I get a kick. I think there's a lot of reasons why I'm happy. I'm happy because I enjoy being with people in those societies. Afghans are awesome. Hanging out with Afghan blokes, drinking tea, playing, listening to poetry, listening to the music, listening to them playing their lutes and their rabab instruments, and and laughing and singing, and they're connected to their artistic sides very much as men over there, while also wielding the AK-47. So the warrior poet, I love that. I'm drawn to it for that reason too. So it's not only that I get to battle my way through the project, but it's also because I love the company, the people, and the landscape.
I've got a couple more questions planned. My job as an interviewer is often to follow up a nice story with a follow-up question. I haven't got a follow-up question for that, but I do have a separate question.
Yeah.
I saw so much. So I was watching again in preparation for the show. I was watching this. I think it was an Australian TV show, a paramedic Australian TV show. I can't remember the name.
Paramedics Australian paramedic.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Reality
it was
show,
definitely exactly. And I had to turn it off. I was getting stressed out. Separate point. But the quote was when you're doing everything you can to save someone's life, but nothing's working, that is just that's what he said. That was so stressful. Have you been in many of those situations, and how do you cope with those situations?
I haven't been to. Oh well, the obvious one is cardiac arrest. And used to do a lot of those. Used to be involved in a lot of those jobs. And it's frustrating. I did a drowning. Not long after moving up here, and we did everything, and it took me a week of, still wondering. Maybe I should have done that. Maybe I should have done that. Maybe I could have done more.
Yeah.
What if I'd done that? You're questioning yourself. And self-reflection is very important. As long but you got to make sure it doesn't destroy you, because it destroys people.
Yeah.
If someone, especially when someone young dies.
Yeah, that's what. Have you had much of that? Like young people.
Oh,
dying?
young people
That's
dying.
awful.
You really. I certainly cut myself up about it when it's happened. Thankfully, I haven't experienced it as much as some of my colleagues have done, and I feel fortunate, having had some of those experiences that my colleagues have had. I really feel for some of my friends, but yeah, it is. It can hit you. It can hit you pretty badly. I mean, because you just wonder whether you could have done more.
Yeah. An issue they brought up in that show as well was the fact that obviously paramedics often don't get to know the outcome of a lot of the situations. You know, your job is to get them alive to the hospital in the best circumstance possible. But past that point, you know,
a lot of paramedics don't want to know the outcome. That's what I found.
Yeah. Do you?
It's all very well. It's all very well if the outcome's good, Sandra. But if it's not, so certainly with me, it's like, you know, it'd be nice to know what happened to that person, but I'm not going to go out of my way to find out.
Yeah.
Because most likely I'll be disappointed, or I just don't want to risk being disappointed. I'd rather just imagine that it turned out well.
Exactly, and then know that you did the best you could, and that's all that matters. Yeah. Finally, then I just wanted to quickly touch on South Africa, because we've talked about the sort of criminal dense nature of South Africa, but a really interesting point that I didn't think of. You think of someone's like cut their arm off or something like this, or stabbing or shooting or something like that. But what I didn't think of is, you mentioned it in the book, that there are, in South Africa at the time, there was a huge HIV problem, and that if you think about it, I think it was like 20% of the population, you said at that time, had HIV, and if you're dealing mostly with people with open blood wounds, you know, you get blood on yourself in Australia, you don't think anything of it. You get blood on yourself in South Africa, you're worrying about it until the test results come back. What was that like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was really reporting on what, you know, my brothers and sisters over there, paramedics, were saying about their experience and what they feared most. And I found it very interesting how most of them said they feared HIV. They feared getting HIV more than they feared getting shot.
Wow.
And this is an environment where sometimes they are shot at.
They had to wear bulletproof vests, right?
And they wear bulletproof. They wore, well, I wore one when I was travelling there with responding. You know, I was responder with his paramedic. It's quite an experience. But I just thought that was interesting that they feared that more, because I guess, you know, they get exposed to blood a lot more than they get shot at.
Yeah.
Even though they get shot at. And so there was that issue. But it's interesting like that. I mean, I often, you know, feel blessed that I'm working here as a paramedic in the relative safety of Australia, even rather than America.
Yeah.
So in the US, where the gun ownership is so widespread, you know, that would make me nervous. You know, going to a door, not knowing who will open it, whether they're armed. You know, we go to a door for patients who are, you know, they might be having a psychotic episode. They might be having a drug psychosis, very agitated, and, you know, crystal meth, whatever. You know, they can be violent. So there's one thing, you know, violence, you know, with your fists. Another thing, if, you know, a gun's in their hand, or, you know, you've got guns in the house. You know, I often knock on the door here. I stand in front of the door. Whereas I think if I was working in the US, you know,
to the side of it,
I wouldn't go in unless I had police, or I'd, you know, knock on the door and stand at the side, and you know, you'd probably be more tense all the time. You still have to have situational awareness here, but you know, we have a rate of, you know, last year at least, we had a rate of 1 assault every day on paramedics in the country.
You don't think of that, do you? Like the danger that paramedics are in. You know, like I think it was in Pakistan, in the documentary, they were doing a test bomb, like not like an actual bomb, but like a test scene where paramedics respond to a bomb. Exactly. And there was a moment in that where one of the paramedics, like, he was trying to get distracted. People have set up actors to distract him, and they were like taking his equipment away from him. And I laughed at first, but then when I read the book, you got sexually harassed. On an event. Yeah. But that.
Yeah. Oh, look, that happens. I mean, it happens to men and women in the job. You know, people grope. You know, you're not sitting very far from them. You know, they're lying on the stretcher in the back. You're a foot from a patient, and sometimes they, you know, might be affected by drugs or alcohol, and they do things. You know, and whether it's violence or whether it's you know, they grope you sexually or whatever. You know, whether you're a male or female, it's you know, it happens, and it shouldn't happen. And you know, there are laws now that are quite strict. And jail terms and whatnot, but I mean, you're in close proximity to very vulnerable and people on edge.
Yeah, I want to. By the way, I want to explain why I introduced that in quite a jovial manner, because thing is, to the people watching, they've got no background. They're thinking
Right.
Sanders introducing the fact that you've been sexually harassed like that in that way. Basically, Benjamin in the books. You describe it in quite a funny way, don't you? Like that someone just sort of squeezed your bum, and you're like, "Who was that?" And then it was quite a funny moment almost, which I think is actually interesting conversation, because it's interesting the reaction to men getting sexually almost assaulted in a sense. The difference in the reaction between men getting assaulted is different to women. But
no, that is interesting, and I think the chapter you're talking about, it would have been difficult for me to get. It would, look, I think it's different for everybody, and there's different levels of it, and the context is different. I mean, I could say, my opinion is across the board, no one should be sexually assaulted.
Of course not,
male or female, and it should be reported, and we have ways to report it. Been saying that back then, this was very early in my career, that particular story,
Peak Hill,
the Indigenous community, I was in this very, very different environment, and you've got to know when to pursue these things, and of course it depends on the level. I think there are degrees, aren't there? I didn't feel particularly threatened in that moment. I didn't feel my safety particularly threatened. Saying that, were that to happen now, I would no doubt feel compelled to document it and report it. It's important that's done to create change.
And finally, then on Australia, I just wanted to touch on this: the fact that us Brits, we probably think of. If I think of Australia, I think animals that can kill you, right? that's what I think of. Every spider under the sun, snake, shark. I don't know what else. Have you had to deal with, specifically sharks? Have you had to deal with any shark incidents or dangerous animal incidents?
I work up here in northern New South Wales. I work with quite a few paramedics who have been to shark attacks. But thankfully I've never had to attend to any. There have been a few shark attacks in this region in the last 5 years. It made a lot of surfers and swimmers and surfers very nervous. Been to a lot of snake bites. We have some of the world's most deadly snakes here, and so anyone who thinks they may have been bitten by a snake is treated like a snake bite, even though we often call them stick bites, because sometimes it's just someone's stepped on a stick or something and they thought they might have got bitten. But we wrap up the limb, we take them to hospital and they get observed. And so there are those creatures here, but it's probably not as bad as you imagine.
Right, because I'm thinking every time you go to the toilet, there's a spider underneath the toilet seat. It feels like that's portrayed that way over here.
Oh, there probably is, but it's probably harmless. It's probably a huntsman. So we have these really big spiders that are called huntsmen, but their fangs are too small to penetrate your skin, or I don't know what it is. No, that might be the daddy long legs. I'm not sure, but either way, the huntsmen, they bite, but they don't leave a fatal. They don't have venom. They don't leave a fatal bite. It's not a fatal bite. They bite. It's not a fatal bite. And so, we kind of just ignore them. They crawl around the walls. And you're just like, sometimes we give them names.
Yeah.
That's Kevin up there.
A little. Do you mark it maybe with some Tipex and treat it as a house pet so you know
what
it is?
It was a pet spider. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to finish then on a bit of an advice section where because I thought it'd be interesting for people to know, we have a big knife problem here in the UK. So that got me thinking, like if someone gets stabbed, for example, what can they do to provide them the biggest chance of survival in those moments?
Depends on where the stabbing is. If it's in the heart, you need to get your finger in there and try and plug the hole. One of my friends did that once as a paramedic and saved the person's life. Generally speaking, you need to put pressure on the wound and call an ambulance. Yeah. I mean, depending on where you are. I mean, if there's no paramedic or ambulance available, some would advise that you put pressure on the wound and you rendezvous with it ambulance
Yeah.
by putting the person in the car. But my official advice would be direct pressure and call 999. I think it is over your way.
Yeah.
And get the paramedics there.
On choking instances, if you've maybe got something lodged in your throat, maybe whether it be a bit of food or whatever, what would be the protocol there for someone to do?
You encourage the person to cough, and if they're turning blue and they're stopping breathing, then you need to, bend them over and give them vigorous slaps between the shoulder blades, or give them a bear hug, squeeze them suddenly, to try and expel the air. If those things don't work, you're going to end up having to do CPR on the person.
Right. How does one do CPR for the people at home? I know these might take extensive courses and things, but just a quick rundown.
No, it's actually more simple than you'd imagine. I do encourage people to attend courses so they can practice on mannequins and all that. But you put your hands over a patient's sternum, lower half of their sternum, with this part of your hand, and then you give compressions, one after the other, to the speed, the rhythm of staying alive by the Bee Gees.
So, and then finally, cardiac arrest. Is there anything, if you've got
that's what you would do.
Sensation?
With cardiac arrest, if they're not breathing,
right, it would be
don't have a pulse, or even if you're unsure, turn them on their back and just compress, and don't stop. Just keep going till the paramedics get there. It's imperative that you don't stop until they get there.
Got you. Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Fascinating stories. And everything's of Benjamin's going to be in the description. The links to his documentaries, links to his movies, books, everything like that, audio books. It's all going to be in this description. So do make sure to check it out and support Benjamin in the future. So again, thanks, Benjamin. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Sam. My pleasure. All the best.
Cheers, guys. I hope you guys did enjoy it. Make sure to subscribe. We're lacking on subscribers, but make sure to subscribe, like, comment. Let me know what you thought of the episode, and I'll speak to you guys soon.